morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Cegelski. And today, we have the one and only CRO over at Influ2. He is Joe McNeill, and he's teaching to build champions today. Nick, why should people listen?
Joe talks about, in the last couple minutes of a conversation with a contact, a champion, a person at a company you're trying to sell to, how to actually understand, are they a champion or not? What to do if they are, and what to do if they're not, and how you can start to qualify and understand the path to getting a deal, which is going to be different based upon the type of person that you're meeting with. Reasons you shouldn't listen to this episode is if every time you meet with someone, they're always a champion and it's always the exact same identical path to getting a deal done. But my guess is that's not you and that you should listen to this episode. All right, Joe, welcome to the show. We start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways. So let's get your 3.
All right, guys, I'm looking forward to it. So number 1 is qualifying the buying process. An old mentor of mine said, people buy emotionally and they justify rationally. And I think in today's market, it's a ruthless environment out there. And people really are thinking about what's best for themselves first. And every deal has a different entry point. So you have to think of, based on the person I'm talking to, how do I move this deal forward? And that's by showing them that this is going to help them individually. It may not be the business case that you close the deal with, but it's the business case that you close the champion with. And as you go about doing that, a big thing I think of is hear what people say, but trust what they do. And you can qualify the buying process, right? If they tell you that they need to run it by their boss, then ask for power. Say, okay, based on if Nick, the SDR, says that sounds great, but I need to talk to Armand, my SDR leader. It says, okay, would it make sense next week to get Armand on a call and run it through him and see what he thinks about this? And then you'll get a sense of how good of a job have I done building Nick as a champion. If Nick says, I am the sole decision maker, a little bit of a red flag. So then you need to test him. You need to say, okay, so we can move forward in the eval and through the financial portion of this deal with just you involved. There's no one that needs to get involved from a technical level or no other team alignment, and see how they respond to that. And if they say it's too premature to think about that, then you can ask them, okay, if we get XYZ done, right? If I can prove to you that this can help you generate more pipeline and that we can get your prospects warmed up for you before you reach out, at that point, can we get Armand involved in the deal cycle? And that's just a real good way to sort of bargain for access for them. And you get a good understanding of how good of a job you've done building out the champion.
Beautiful. What's number 2?
Number 2 would be block your time on your calendar and do one thing at a time. I think the hardest part about being in sales, being an AE specifically, is what should I do right now to impact my pipeline or my deal cycles? And you can make that easier on yourself in 2 different ways. You block your time out where you're only doing one thing at a time, right? If you're building lists, then you know you're building a list and you know exactly what you need to do. And then you can do that very effectively by focusing on that task and only that task. When you're cold calling, you're rolling through your cold calls and you know that's all you do. Everything else is shut down. You get into that state, you're very effective, you close it out. Especially if you're an enterprise AE, is like you don't win a ton of deals throughout the course of the year. So you need to focus on the outcomes that you're driving day in and day out. I have one AE actually that keeps a deck of cards on her desk and she flips a card every time she completes impactful tasks that day. And it's a good way to remind herself at the end of the day of, hey, maybe I didn't have any new meetings, I didn't move any deals forward, but I did a lot of things that are going to help me move deals and progress deals and hit my quota this year.
Amazing. Round us out, Joe. What's number 3?
The last one is you hear a lot of people talk about this, but it's really listen, diagnose, and ask. How to be an active listener, how to be curious. And I think a lot of people focus on this being only a sales skill, but it's something you can practice in the outside world. If you're early in your sales career, you need to develop the muscle of how do I listen to someone answer a question, maybe a simple question right away, diagnose it. And you know what, if you need to pause and take silence before you deliver a good second question, that's fine. Silence is okay on both sides. If you need to think for a little bit, give yourself 5 to 10 seconds to think of an impactful question and ask it. If they're silent, even better. That means you just ask a good question. You have them thinking. Do not interrupt their thought process. Just wait, right? But if you want to practice this when you're talking to your neighbors, when you're talking at a networking event, try it on anything, on a topic you know nothing about. If I'm talking to Nick about wrestling, I know nothing about wrestling, right? Let me see how much I can learn from Nick about wrestling in a 20-minute conversation where he's driving the conversation, because it could be a lot. If I'm talking to him about hockey, I know more about that, but let me see if I can do that in that conversation as well and understand how much Nick knows about hockey and how much he cares about hockey and what's important to him about hockey. So it's really ask a question, get the response, diagnose what you just heard, and deliver another good question. And the balance is try not to make it interrogation. At times, if I'm talking to Nick about hockey, I know a little bit. I can offer some things that I know, like he mentioned, like, hey, did you see Game 7 last night? I say, yeah, I saw. What did you think about this play? Okay, who do you have? Who do you want to win? Who do you want to go to the cup? You can offer some information as well and then keep going through the diagnosis process.
When I first wrestled Nick for 3 minutes, I thought I didn't know much about wrestling. After I wrestled him, I was like, yeah, I must be a pro. On that note, Joe, let's start with the topic of building champions. A lot of sellers make the mistake of thinking that the first person they do a discovery call with is a champion, or the first person who's willing to take a second call is a champion. And that's not the case. When you think about a good champion, what are some of the things on your checklist that you're looking for?
Yeah, a good champion is really, are they going to help move this deal forward in a meaningful way? And I would say, Armand, like in the first call, if you're talking to someone, they might not be a champion, but they can still support you, right? They can still give you information that you can't get otherwise. And they might be willing to help you in ways that maybe if you're talking to an AE or an SDR, they don't have the juice to get a deal done, but they can tell you who the main stakeholders are and what's important to those stakeholders. They can prep you a little bit if you have them interested in what you're doing and bought in a way where you can help them. Champions are really the ones that are going to take the deal and move it forward. And right now, I don't even know what the numbers are these days, but the buying group sizes are getting bigger every year, right? I think it's 8 to 10 people involved in a deal at this point. And the tech sector is ruthless right now, as I said, and everybody has their own motivations. Everybody has their own political capital that they're very tight with. So it's, how do I make this resonate with this individual? And how do I impact them in a meaningful way where they're going to help move the deal forward? Because the business case that gets the deal done is not always the business case for Nick and why he wants to get the deal done. And it's not how he's going to measure the success of the product. Especially now with you get security getting involved, you get legal getting involved, you have procurement getting involved. It's like, how do I appease all of these parties within the deal where they all want to move it forward? And I had an old boss who used to just say, are they a red light, yellow light, or green light? And really your job as a seller, multi-threading, is just to turn as many red lights yellow and as many yellow lights green as you can. Because right now there's 10, 9, 8, 10 people involved, and one person can torpedo it.
So let's turn that leapfrog motion into an example. You mentioned that an AE might not be the person who's going to be your champion, but they can at least get you to a champion, or they can influence a deal. You sit down with an AE and you get them for 30 minutes. How do you run that conversation in a way that gets you to the right person?
Yeah, I think part of it is coming in with genuine curiosity, right? Because sometimes you'll talk to that AE and you'll find out like, maybe this isn't a great prospect for me, right? Based off of what their focus is. At Influ2, we sell tech that really impacts individuals that sell bigger deals, right? And bigger can be, it's a relative scale. But if I talk to the AE and they're like, yeah, our average deal size on our sales force is $1,000, I just learned something that could save me a ton of time because not really a qualified account, right? So I think sometimes people are so focused on like, how do I talk to this person in a way where I can close this deal, instead of like, how do I learn about this account and learn if this is going to be a good fit for us? But part of it is approaching it as, what does your go-to-market look like? And what are your challenges right now? Is it conversion rates? Is it pipeline generation? Is it you're very commoditized in the market and it's a pricing war amongst others? And then you can talk about what are things that you've done to try to overcome that recently? How has your boss done it? Because if I'm selling, let's say I'm selling advertising software and I find out that their boss bought advertising software last year and got burned, right? That's some important intel, right? Maybe we're really positioned really well to impact their pain, but they've already tried that solution and it didn't work in the past. Like, why didn't it work? How was it adopted? And like, how can I approach this differently in a way where I'm not just going to walk down and do a trap door?
Yeah, that's really good. This is something that I do when I'm selling sponsorships is I'll be talking to a marketing leader and I will always, and almost always, they're like, yeah, we're trying to sell to more sales leaders and more sales teams. We want to sponsor 30 MPC. And I know that marketing and sales are both very much interconnected. And usually, by the virtue of us having an audience here at 30 Minutes to President's Club, I can find a salesperson at the company where I'm talking to marketing leadership and actually triangulate what I'm hearing from marketing leadership with the sales side of things. And that actually informs future conversations with marketing leadership and helps me strengthen my qualification of the account, but also gives me additional ammo to help drive the conversations with marketing leadership. I want to ask you, Joe, about the back couple minutes of the conversation. So you meet with Armand. He's a budding enterprise AE. He's prospecting. He's building some pipeline. And you identify there are some problems that you can solve for Armand. And you feel like Armand's leaning in too. He's really excited about this Influ2 thing that you're selling. And he might want to learn more. Armand's not going to get the deal done alone. At the end of the meeting, talk to me about the last 5 to 7 minutes of the interaction and how you run that with Armand, the AE.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different ways. You can qualify what he knows about the buying process, which I talked about earlier, but you can also just say, hey, Armand, I appreciate all the information that you've provided. Based off of what you heard, what do you hope to get out of this? I don't want your help and then to make your life harder. I want this to impact you too. And outside of Influ2, is there anything else I can do for you? I appreciate you helping me, right? Who do you guys sell to? What do you do? Like when you're prospecting, if you see anybody in my network that I'm connected to that you want an intro to, can I introduce you to anything? Like how can I pay it forward type of thing? And I think that's like a very underserved, just right thing to do in general is like, how can you help them, not just as an employee there, but whether it's networking outside of their employment or just helping their deal cycles with people get in the sense that just the more that you help others in the market, the more it's going to come back to you as well.
I do some advisory work for different founders. And the way that I will oftentimes get in front of those founders is through venture capital firms. So I got an introduction to a venture capital firm the other day. And at the end of the call, the partner actually beat me to the punch, where he said, hey, this has been a great call. How can I be helpful to you? And I felt really uncomfortable asking, hey, could you introduce me to these founders? I helped them out with advisory. And so instead, I actually put it back on him immediately. It made me want to be like, oh, what types of founders are you looking for? How can I be helpful to you? And so if you first offer, this is how I can help you, oftentimes the AE will ask in return, no, where can I help you sell this deal? And it invokes the rule of reciprocity. So Joe, let's say that this works perfectly well, and then you get an introduction to your proper champion. Let's say for the sake of time, you run that discovery call. Talk to me about what does the end of a discovery call look like when you know you have a champion?
Yeah, I think the end of a discovery call when you know you have a champion is a pretty transparent, like, how do we work together? It sounds like we have mutual interests here. What is the best way to work together to move this forward? Whether it's who else needs to get involved, what's the best way to get them involved? And then you can offer suggestions like, here's what I've seen work, right? Like we like to do a program wireframing where you and I work together and maybe a couple of your colleagues work together to wireframe what a program with you would look like and how it could potentially impact you. Would it make sense for us to do that ahead of getting your executives involved so they have more tangible context around this outside of just a product demo, right? We can give them the product demo, but we can actually say, here's how we would work directly within your go-to-market framework to impact your sales efficiency and pipeline efficiency and how we would fit within your current tech program. So you should do some suggesting about what works best, but you should also get their ideas on like, how do we move this forward? Who are the best people to talk to and how should we approach them?
So talk to me about this concept of a wireframe.
Yeah, for us, we sell a little bit different of tech at Influ2 than people have used before, right? If you're selling sales engagement and they've used sales engagement before, I think you can talk through, okay, what in the past has worked? How would we, deploy this? For us, it's more of, let's talk through your current process. Let's talk through how you select prospects, who those prospects are, what the buying groups look like, what your ICP is. And we really figure out like, where's the lowest hanging fruit for us to start with you, where we can make the most impact that rolls up into your OKRs or your sort of main impactful areas of your go-to-market function. And we can really show this is what the program would look like. This is how it would make an impact. And this is where it would fit, where it's not just a hypothetical of this is what we do and this is how we help other customers.
Could you talk about at the end of that first champion discovery call? You said it before, but I'll ask you to recap it. What are the next couple of steps you want to take with your champion? But then how much of that do you actually share? Because my guess is you don't walk all the way to proposal and you're like, oh, and then if that goes well, we're going to go to power. And then if that goes well, we're going to go to finance and then procurement and then legal and all that stuff. So what are the next couple of steps? And how far do you foreshadow with your champion?
I think transparency wins a lot of times, but it really depends on the nature of the champion. Let's say they're in middle management and they really want to do this for whatever reason. I think circling back to them in a way of saying, hey, just a heads up, I wanted to keep you posted at where we're at because I know you're excited about this. I've talked to Nick, the CMO. I've talked to Armand, the CSO. We went through the wireframe of this and that. It sounds like things are promising and we're going to move to procurement. Are you hearing anything other than that on your side? Or is there anything I should be aware of? Or do things look good from what you're hearing as well? Because you can triangulate what you're thinking back through them and get a feel for if they have their ear to the ground and have heard anything. And maybe they're like, yeah, apparently they've run into a little bit of a hiccup with procurement where procurement is making them explore a couple competitors as a part of the buying process. And here's the competitors they're exploring. So-and-so is excited about them because they're cheaper. I don't like it because they don't do what you guys do in this, that, and the other way.
So Joe, one of the things that you were sharing with us on the prep call to this was you were talking about the reason that most deals get done is when you have a business case that is tied to executive pain. But when you meet with Armand, an SDR leader, a director of SDR, that person is going to have different motivations and reasons that they will move you forward in the sales process than a business case tied to executive pain. Because Armand, in this scenario, is not an executive. And I'm curious about how you surface what matters to Armand that's different than like the business case pain that you're surfacing and building, I think, in parallel to figuring out what matters to Armand.
Yeah, so I can give an example just at Influ2, right? We do contact level advertising, so we can target specific individuals with ads. We push the impression and engagement back to the contact record. At the executive level, a lot of times the pain is, hey, we can show you the influence that ads are having on your pipeline, right? There's the old, I think it was John Wanamaker quote of half my budget of advertising is wasted. I just don't know what half, right? Let's take your ad budget and let's show you how it's impacting your revenue, right? From an SDR leader standpoint, doesn't really matter in some ways. What does matter is I had 48 SDRs at one point. It was scary at times because we spent so much time training them on how to pick who to prospect rather than how to convert who they're prospecting into pipeline that like, hey, Nick, the SDR leader, we can create a completely prescriptive way for your SDRs to see who the warmest cold prospects are, right? We create this dashboard. They don't need to think about who they put in sequence anymore. They just roll from the top to the bottom here within your pre-vetted buying groups, right? So for Nick, the SDR leader, it's all about making their SDRs' lives easier by being more prescriptive in their target selection. But for the executives, it's more about what impact is my advertising dollars having on my pipeline or revenue as a whole. So it's a trickle-down effect, similar to an OKR structure, where maybe the main objective is this, but then we look down at what are the key results or pieces that are rolling up into that, sort of like a pyramid.
Great. You have a bunch of meetings with Armand, SDR leader, and you're having all these conversations about making his life and his team's life easier. And then he goes and socializes that up to the VP of marketing or CMO. And they're like, I don't care about that. That's not a business case tied to executive pain. So Joe, I guess what this makes my next natural question then is, if we're talking about the reason that we're going to get deals done is business case tied to exec pain, what you just described for Armand, the SDR leader, is not either of those things. It's how you're going to make Armand's life and his function easier, which might get a deal done sometimes, but it's not the most consistent best path in order for you to do that. And so my question for you is, you've had a couple meetings with Armand, the SDR leader, and now he's going to start bringing you up to the CMO, who's maybe your ultimate buyer in this instance. How are you talking with Armand about moving you to that next tier so that Armand doesn't go and pitch the CMO on saving SDRs a couple hours a week?
I think it's just being upfront with Armand of like, hey, Armand, it sounds like we've exposed some areas that we can really help you. Typically, those areas aren't they don't move the needle for CMOs. Like when we sell to a CMO, our business case looks a little different than what we just talked about. We still accomplish what we had talked about for you, but for them, it's more about how is revenue impact and how is advertising budget impacting revenue and pipeline. So when we talk to Nick, the CMO, let's I can walk you through some of the main talking points of what resonates with them with our Influ2 product, or I can help you craft that email as an introductory where it's going to resonate with Nick in a way that
there was one deal that I was working back at PAVE, my alma mater. There was a 2-step tactic that really helped me broach this topic with my champion. So the first was a question that I learned from a past guest, Morgan Mello, which is you first need to ask them, I'm curious, how do you plan on justifying this internally? And sometimes a champion will know, look, I know I want this, but here's how we get to the VP. And then from there, you just like reinforce that's the right answer. But then if they don't, the way that I've found it really helpful to challenge that is a prospect once used the language with me between you, me, and the wall. And I use that language all the time where I'll be like, hey, between you, me, and the wall, can we talk about the best way to get this thing done? And I'll use that as an opportunity to be like, hey, I know you really care about this, but I've seen VPs 9 out of 10 times who hear that and they don't care. Can I give you a couple things that'll probably resonate with them, knowing that I know you want to solve this problem? And so that's our secret between you, me, and the wall of how to get this done, where I'm acknowledging that I'm going to solve your problem, but I'm also feeding you the problem that's going to get it done.
All right. So Joe, up until now, we've talked about things going well as you build champions and multi-thread and up-level across the sales cycle. I want to ask you about some troubleshooting FAQs. So let's go back to the example of you've got a meeting with an SDR and the meeting goes well and you're qualifying the buying process at the end and you're testing them as a champion. Can you remind me, what is the question that you ask them at the end in order to qualify the buying process? And then let's talk about some scenarios where you might not get the answer that you want and how you handle things from there.
Yeah, so you're going to do one of 3 things to qualify the buying process. You're either going to ask for power, so you're going to ask to move up the org chart. You're going to test the buyer and test that what they've told you is accurate in terms of how the buying process works, or you're going to bargain for access. Mm-hmm. If they've been somewhat hesitant to move you up the org chart, then you need to bargain with what do we need to get done? What do we need to accomplish together before you'd be comfortable doing that?
So let's do voiceover. Direct ask to power. What does that sound like?
Yeah, it says, if they said, this looks cool, I like the idea of this, I need to get my boss involved, who is the leader of SDRs, say, okay, that sounds great. Is it possible to schedule a 15 to 20 minute call with Armand, the SDR leader, to introduce some basic concepts? Just a direct ask.
Great. And Armand goes, let me handle it. I'm pretty good with him. We're pretty close. We've got a one on Thursday anyway to look at my pipeline and my metrics, and I'll bring it up with him then. How would you respond in that scenario?
I understand we have some work to do together to get to a point where you're comfortable with that. Like, how about you and I do a demo next week? We work through and we further flesh out, like, to get you comfortable with the fact that we can resolve XYZ problem for you. We can help you build more pipeline. Mm-hmm. At that point, if you're comfortable after the demo, would we be able to schedule that 15 to 20 minutes?
And in the rare instance where somebody says no, or you sense hesitation, is that a deal you're going to abandon? Are you going to have a further exploration with them? I'm curious about how you would think about using your time with that person.
Yeah, I think I would ask directly, like, I'm sensing a little hesitation. What from your end is causing the pause? Or I don't want you to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. Like, where's the discomfort coming from? And potentially chatting with your boss about this.
Yeah.
And just directly ask them. Because it might be nothing to do with your product. It might be, I had a tough conversation with them last week, or I feel like I bring up a lot of products to them and they never really care. It might be something totally outside of what you've done, and then you and them can find a way to navigate together.
That's really good. That reminds me of something that I learned from Charles Mulbauer, which is the philosophy of if you sense it, say it. Meaning you feel that hesitation from them and you're asking. I also like language I've heard from you before, which is like, what would it take for you to feel comfortable to bring this in front of them? Because now they can tell you their explicit exit criteria of what will get you a pass to that person you need to get to. And then you can decide, do you or don't you actually want to go through the exit criteria that they present to you?
Yeah, because typically if it's a detractor or someone that's a blocker, they're not going to be upfront with you that they're like, yeah, it looks okay, but I just don't know if we're ready to introduce you to Armand, right? They're going to be more like, nah, you don't need to meet with Armand. You and I are good talking together. He doesn't need to be involved. It's going to be more direct that doesn't need to happen language, rather than you probably should meet with him, but I'm not ready for that yet type of language.
Joe, I feel like we could have so much more to go through, but sadly we are running out of time and the clock is ticking. And I got to move us to our final question. And my final question is this. We've talked about a lot of really great things salespeople should be doing. Now I got to ask you about a shouldn't. And so my last question is, what is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's they're afraid to ask the question that they deep down inside they know the answer to disqualify or kill an opportunity, right? A lot of people focus on why will I win a deal? A lot of them don't focus on why will I lose the deal. And if they've put a ton of work into a deal and they sense something happening, they will avoid just addressing it directly for fear of hearing the answer that they deep down know to be the truth and the deal being done for now. If you can go through and sell to the why will people not buy rather than blindly flowing with the happy ears into why will they buy, then you can be a lot more effective.
Joe, thank you for joining us. Everybody stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon.
Your top 4 takeaways from this episode include number 1.
Do not be terrified of silence. If you are having a conversation with a prospect and you need a moment to think about the question you are going to ask next, it is okay for you both to be quiet for a bit. I needed that reminder in this episode. Number 2, if you are talking with a contact who is not willing to take you to where you need to go, you should do one of 2 things. Thing number 1 is you should explicitly ask them under what circumstances or what would need to happen in order for you to feel comfortable introducing me to your VP of marketing. And then let the other party set the exit criteria or the conditions that need to be true in order for that introduction to be made. And then you can make the determination of, should you go through Armand's 52-point checklist before he'll intro you to the VP of marketing? Or should you take the approach, which would be the second way you could handle this, just start prospecting that person and go around them, because Armand's not going to actually take you there. So you can make that determination and determine the best course of action based upon their response.
Number 3, if you're running a groundswell motion, for example, your sales cycle is starting with an AE who can influence a deal but is not going to be a champion, the way you can end the conversation is by first offering to help them. And in return, they will oftentimes offer to help you in return. And that's when you can ask for the introduction to your champion. And then lastly, number 4, you need to figure out 2 sets of motives. You need to figure out your champion's motives, and then you need to figure out the business or executive motives. And then you need to educate your champion on that those are 2 different sets of motives, and you need to keep your motives between me, you, and the wall, and then focus on selling the business motives upward to everyone else. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out?
All right, so Armand, I do have a motive, and it is that Influ2 is a sponsor of ours. And when we work with a sponsor, we always put together toolkits that are actually helpful to you as a salesperson with our sponsor. And so we put together one with Influ2 called 9 Ways to Humanize Your Outreach and Triple Your Replies. And so if you are looking for a really awesome prospecting resource, there is a link in the show notes. Go grab it for free. It's meant to be helpful. It's meant to help you book more meetings and close some deals. And we'll see you at President's Club and as well as next week on the show.